Our skin and bones pieces are cut, so now it's time to join those pieces into actual parts. And one of the things we have to do regularly is center pieces on other pieces. So here's kind of the trick for doing that is you basically just take your tape measure, find a dimension, in this case 13 inches, that's somewhere out close to the center, and measure it from both directions. Between the two marks will be the actual center of the piece. Now, probably the easiest mistake to make is to put a brad nail where you're later going to want to drill a hole. So what I'm going to do is mark where the holes are going to go. I just put little X's there, and we're going to avoid those particular spots when I put a brad nail in. And there are several places where you want to make sure you do this. It's very difficult to drill a hole through a brad nail, and it's also very hard on your bit, and therefore let's not do it. So I found the centers of all of these pieces, transferred the centers to the other piece, in the case of this bones material here, and then we're just going to stick some glue on it. And this is exactly the technique we're going to use everywhere we glue two parts together. I actually even like to take a little piece of scrap wood and just smooth it and make it a nice even layer of glue, and that way I know we have glue everywhere the two pieces of wood contact each other, so that joint is going to be as strong as that joint can be. Now right there is the center of this piece, and I'm going to start nailing there. I've lined up the two marks, and I'm just going to make sure I don't put a brad nail where the X's are that mark the holes. Now we need to repeat the process on the other side. I'm going to speed things up here a little bit, which of course I do from time to time, so it doesn't take forever to do these videos. And you don't want to take forever to watch them either. Line up those two centers, and what we have here is a top. All we got to do is clean up our glue, and there might be a little oozing out here and there that we want to get rid of. So our top is done. We'll be putting those braces and the stand stops on when we assemble the box. So it's time to do the stand ends. We're going to use our little centering trick here to identify the centers of the plywood. And you really only have to measure it in one place and then just transfer that center to the other one, since they're all the same dimension. So that takes care of all the plywood stuff. We're going to do the same thing with the redwood. Find our centers, transfer that center to all of the other pieces. Now, obviously I'm going to use the marks I'm making to align the bones material with the skin. And that looks good to me, so last thing we got to do is we want to check for good side and bad side. I want the bad side facing, in this case, away from the redwood. Sometimes the bad side of the wood you're going to want facing toward the redwood, and other times you're going to want it facing away. Same concept with the glue. Let's spread it out nice and even, line up our two marks. There's no holes to drill in this piece, so it really doesn't particularly matter where you put your brad nails here. Now the only thing here about this you'll notice from your drawing is that this piece doesn't actually fit flush. It's only there's like an overlap associated with this piece. So we only want glue on one side. That being the case, I'm not going to try to smooth it out. You could, but I don't believe we need to here. I eyeball the line halfway, and then I'm going to make sure it's parallel. And again, no holes are going to be drilled in this piece, so I can put brad nails wherever I want to. I like to start in the center because that's where the mark is. And that takes care of the crossmember pieces on that stand. Now to mount a leg, we just align it up at the top. I'm going to take my little pencil here, and mark where we want to put the glue. And I like there to be glue everywhere the wood surfaces contact, even on these side edges. Not that you actually have to have it there, it's just, oh, I don't know, you can do it, so why not? Now we're going to do the same thing here, stick the glue where I marked with my pencil. I don't want it anywhere else because it just would be a mess then. I'd have to clean up. And then carefully sort of butter that glue out right where I'd penciled. And of course, this will give us a really good bond, and should be very strong, stronger than we actually need. Let's align the top. And then the other thing I want to do is make sure that the piece is flush against the two cross members, which is that direction. And then we'll go ahead and put this thing in. Now, what you want to be careful of here is that you can only go in as far as the width of that leg. So if you went way into there, it wouldn't catch anything. You got to go to here in order to mount it into the redwood. And it's rinse and repeat on the other side. It's really just exactly the same thing. No big issues to be concerned with here. Let's just be deliberate. Do it right. Now, the piece is almost done. It's not quite done. We still have to put the hand holes in it. So, and by the way, you're obviously going to have to do both of those pieces. And we're going to drill a little hole here. I'm going to use a router to do this with. There are actually any number of ways to put the hand holes in. You could use a jigsaw, some hand tools. They're a little messier. So I tend to make a template, which if you look on your little drawing, there's a note there, right square in the center, about making a template. And then what this template does is effectively provides a guide for our router. I recommend this technique. It makes for a nice, good-looking, smooth hole. We're going to have to make sure the height of that, or should I say the depth of the router bit is appropriate for routing out here. But again, it's not the only way to do this. You can, I'm sure, imagine any number of ways to cut a hole in a piece of wood. Usually, though, you have to drill a hole in order to get started. Now I like to do sort of a rough cut first, pull all the shavings and chips out of there, and then do it one more time just to make sure it's fairly smooth. The other thing I'm going to do to that is I will sand those edges because we don't want any splinters on those edges. And that pretty much takes care of our ends once you have both of them taken care of. And that brings us to probably the hardest parts to build. That's the two ends. Most of the work we've done already, though, by putting the dados and the holes in the side pieces of the ends. Now again, let's check our wood. Here's our good side. And what I'm going to want, I want the bad side to be, well, facing up as we build this, because that's going to put the good side toward the redwood. As it turns out, that will be the outside of the box, which as you assemble things, that'll make more sense to you. Now, the problem here is we have a bucket full of holes to drill if, in fact, by the way, not all of you are going to do this, but notice how many holes you have to drill here. So there's a lot of opportunity to put a brad nail in the wrong spot. So therefore, what we're going to do is we're going to mark where the holes go before we even put this thing together. And that way, I can just make sure I don't put any brad nails where I'm going to later drill a hole. And transfer all the holes to the other pieces, transfer all those marks. I transferred the centers. Now we mark in 1-inch increments because that's what your little drawing there calls for. And by the way, it doesn't have to be 1 inch. Of course, you can make it whatever you want. You can only put a few in. You can put more in if you want to. This is going to give you adjustability on your drawer and compartment shelves. And again, here's this little trick. It's very important, though, to get glue everywhere. There doesn't have to be a lot of glue, but it has to be everywhere the two surfaces contact. Now, I had the marks, so I'm just going to transfer those marks over. I'm just eyeballing it to make sure that I don't put a brad nail where I'm going to later want to drill a hole. Now we'll get the other side on this end using exactly the same technique. At this moment in time, I'd only put the marks for the holes on one piece. That's why I had to pull it over and use it. Now you did notice that the slots for both of those sides went the same direction on the piece of plywood. That is, those little two holes you're looking at right there are exactly the same on the other side of the wood. You can get those backwards, in which case you'll be pretty angry with yourself once you put it together, and it'll be obvious you have a big problem. But while you're doing this, you want to make sure that the slots line up. Not that I've ever done that. Well, more than 2 or 3 times. Let's clean up that excess glue, and I want to show you a little something here that happens on these end pieces. Well, first let's, what I have there are 5/8 inch brad nails, and what I want to do now is I want to put some 1.25 brad nails in the corners. Because if we take a good look at this piece, here's what happens. Notice how they don't necessarily line up as good as we'd like, and there might be a little bit of a gap there. We want to take both of those things out. And in order to do that, while it's still wet, we're going to take our 1.25 brad nail. And by the way, if you're a kit builder, I sent you some finish nails that are 1.25 inch finish nails. This is where they go. We get our fingers out of the way and shoot a 1.25 brad nail in there, and that brings those two pieces together. Now I actually squeeze it pretty hard, take the gap out, zap it with an 1.25 nail, and it holds. And then once the glue is dry, it'll just stay that way. You'll never have to worry about it again. Now we're going to do that to both ends. And next we're going to have to drill holes in these. And one of the things I want to mention here is that if you take one of the ends and masking tape the center partition to it, you can drill the center partition and the end at the same time. That will align the holes perfectly. In other words, imagine that piece right there with a center partition masking taped right to it, directly over that. In other words, the two pieces of plywood would be directly over one another. Now right now I'm setting the depth of the hole, and I want it to be so that you have about maybe 3/8 of an inch of a dowel sticking out. And then once we have the depth set, let's make sure it's going to drill right straight through the middle of the bones material as shown there. And then I'm going to use my little shade tree mechanic fence I built here for this thing to keep these holes on the same line. This is probably the biggest question I get about building check boxes, is how do you keep the holes straight? And now I've already marked them on there, so all I have to do is start zipping the holes in it. It's just run it all the way down to the stop. I've set the stop at the right depth. Flip it over. Do the other side. And what we have here is a finished end with holes. And notice they're straight. Now there actually are two other holes you have to get in those ends. I use a template to drill them. You can just mark them. And honestly, you can drill these holes before you even put the skin on the bones if you mark them carefully. Let's put the bones material on our center partition, or divider as I like to call it. And what you're going to find is that that will straighten out quite a bit when we put it in the box and stick the shelves in. All right, here we are with the top and bottom. Probably the only thing you really got to watch out for is try to get the bad side to the inside of the box. Although in the case of the bottom, the first one there that I'm going to use is the top because it's the worst one. I'll use this one as the bottom. Now, in the case of the bottom, you could actually put the good side to the inside of the box because that's what you see. I don't, because in the case of the sides, you see the bad side, so I just want them to look consistent with one another. Now, those two pieces are the same length. The bones and the skin are both the same length there, so I don't really have to mark any centers or anything of that nature. Now, the other two 23 and 7/8 by 15 and 7/8 pieces we're going to use for doors, and we want the straightest ones looking down the edge of it. You want the straightest ones for your doors. If you get a bit of a bow in that, then you might have problems sliding it in and out of the box. We got a good side, we got a bad side. And what we want to do is just put the framework on the bad side. And as you can see here, the object of the game is to simply center the framework on the door. That's pretty much it. It doesn't have to be exact, but just get it kind of close. And of course, I think by now you ought to have a pretty good idea how to center things. It's really no particular trick. So I'm just putting a bunch of marks on here that are going to help me make sure that these pieces end up in the right place so that they ultimately will be centered. It also has to be parallel with the edge. I'm just going to check it here, make sure we have the same distance on both sides. As I remember, that's about 2 5/8. Now notice I'm going to use the table here. This is sort of a little trick. As I butt that right up against the table, I slid it right over the edge of the table and then butted my brad nailer up against that. The centerpiece, same deal. Every place there's wood, I like there to be glue. Where wood is going to touch wood, we're centered there. Back on our table again, right down the center. Stick a brad nail there. We're centered there. Let's stick a brad nail there. You get the idea. Now, I do like to go back over to the top and put a couple more brad nails in, just to make sure that the two pieces would come together. Now, our easiest parts to build are going to be our shelves. Now, not everybody's going to be doing this. By the way, not everybody's going to be drilling holes in it either. Some people might choose to use runners instead of holes, and that's fine. It's much easier to build a box that way. But when I do this, I actually put 3 1/8-inch brad nails in it. Now, they're kind of hard to find. Good luck with that one. You might just glue these. All you'd have to do is glue it and put a little weight on it, not even brad nail it at all. You can certainly get away with doing that. I don't have time to do that, so I don't do that. I've got to have it done, and therefore I have to, nail it. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm not going to do anything with the last piece, with the compartment piece. I'm actually going to measure the box once I get everything together, and just in case I need to trim that piece a little bit. There's all our parts. We're ready to put them together.